of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
We've survived the Daleks' master plan, which, I'll be honest, got a bit heavy there towards the end. So let's hope we have some more gentle, fun hijinks in the next episode of Doctor Who, which I see is called The Massacre. I'm Ian.
And I'm Mark. And welcome to All of Time and Space. Let's waste no time. Let's get up to speed with where we are in the story. The TARDIS lands in Paris on 19th of August 1572. Driven by scientific curiosity, the Doctor leaves Stephen to meet and exchange views with the apothecary Charles Preslan. Before he disappears, he warns Stephen to stay out of mischief, religion and politics. But in 16th century Paris, it is impossible to remain a mere observer, and Stephen soon finds himself involved with a group of Huguenots. The Protestant minority of France is being threatened by the Catholic hierarchy, and danger stalks the Paris streets. As Stephen tries to find his way back to the TARDIS, he discovers that one of the main persecutors of the Huguenots appears to be the Doctor. Or is it? We'll find out after this.
You see that? We've landed in the middle of the 16th century. Yes, and that was the very time.
What are you talking about?
Yes, that strange brotherhood of apothecaries. Well ahead of their time. Now, what was the name of that man that lived in Paris? Preslan! That's the man. Yes, the most advanced man of them all. I must try to get to see him.
Too cautious, Nicholas. The Catholics know of only one way to settle our differences.
Times are difficult enough for us here, without you provoking further quarrels.
I? Oh, can't be fair. Paris hates our kind. We'll do anything it can to provoke us.
You must control your temper, Gaston. It is imperative that we keep the peace at this time.
We're in Paris.
Quite so, dear boy. Well, now, don't let us dawdle. We must go in and change.
Well, have you got the right clothes?
You'll be surprised what I've got in my wardrobe. And I want to turn over a few old papers. Yes, come along. There's no time to lose. Come along. Come along.
And welcome back. And I'm so pleased to say we've been joined by the legendary Mr. Brendan Jones. Brandy Bongos himself. Yay!
Thank you very much.
Hi, Brendan.
Hello. Thank you very much, and hello, dear
What
listeners.
a pleasure to have you along.
Thank you. I'm very, very glad to be on, because it's been a couple of years since we did Nerdology, I think. So
We did a Nintendo episode. We'll have to do another one sometime. I've got to get around to doing some more Nerdologies. We had some chances on for the last episode that went out. I don't know who they were, but they stood in quite admirably.
Still haven't been paid for that, Cochrane. Not
No.
quite sure
Well,
what's happening there.
Yeah, I'll give you 33% of what I get from the revenue of that show.
Great, good. So I can start looking at yachts.
Imaginary ones, yes.
Right.
As they might say on Mystery Science Theatre 3000, toy boat.
Anyway, enough of this shenanigans. Ian.
Yes, we can't go any further, I'm afraid, Brendan, without subjecting you to the horror of the mind probe.
No, not the mind probe.
Getting to know
Who?
Getting to know all about
Who?
Wow.
That was lovely.
Wow.
That sounded so
impressed.
moist. Oh, wonderful. to fill you in, Brendan, obviously we used to have a really good quiz-based setup here, and the jeopardy was that if you got enough of the questions wrong, you'd be tossed into the time lash at the end of the show. I'm guessing my colleague Mark still hasn't repaired our time lash, so we're unable to offer the full perilous quiz experience, and therefore it's just a gentle chat, really. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that sounds great. I haven't had that many gentle chats while strapped to a table with a large probe above me, but yeah, sure, let's go.
You haven't lived. Oh my god. Okay, well, let's kick off. A simple one to start with. Brendan, what is your favourite console room?
Oh, I would have to say the Mike Yardley 1983 to 1989 model console room, otherwise known as the Blinking Mushroom of Death.
Oh,
wow.
What a good answer, and what a classicist you clearly are. A scholar and a gentleman. Yeah, I personally would go for the same, but all in black, because obviously I'm a Master fan, and I quite like the Master's TARDIS. But enough of that. Question 2. What's your favourite Dalek story of all time?
The Power of the Daleks.
Oof.
Why?
Because for so much of it, it is structured to show off their intelligence. You look at something like Resurrection, which is still a very good story and a story I very much enjoy, and it's more about the Daleks sort of shooting people and conniving, but just sort of telling off their subordinates and whatever. In The Power of the Daleks, they actually have to restrain themselves in order to get what they want. And the real thing that is the downfall of the humans in the story is their infighting, and the Daleks just exploit that. And then at the end, they go on a rampage and shoot everyone. I just think that it shows them in such a good light. And I think also it's something that the current era has picked up really well. The current era may have made some missteps here and there, but I think their 2 Dalek stories they've done so far really hark back to that 60s and David Whittaker interpretation of them.
Cool. Okay. Bit of a personal question, this, for reasons that we may come to. But apart from Doctor Who, what's your favourite Russell T Davies drama?
Okay, so confession time. I've never watched another Russell T Davies drama right the way through. I've seen the first episode of Queer as Folk. I've seen the first episode of The Second Coming, and I've yet to watch It's a Sin. And Queer as Folk just didn't particularly resonate with me. I think it was a bit too far removed, and the American version even more so, but I'm able to watch it and go, this is landmark and important television. Absolutely no reason why I haven't watched the second part of The Second Coming. And in terms of It's a Sin, the reason I haven't watched that yet is my husband actually lived through the 80s, and I've sort of mentioned to him that this drama exists. He's gone, oh, that's nice. And I think, okay, can we watch it? But I don't want to push it too much. But that's the one I'm sort of the most interested in seeing, because Russell's spoken about it and sort of said this is what he's wanted to make for the last 20 years. So I suppose in the tradition of us talking about a missing story today, I would have to nominate It's a Sin because it's the one that's the most mysterious and the one I'm most looking forward to.
That's brilliant.
Have you seen it, Iain?
I watched it, so I made a terrible mistake on Friday. I flooded my bathroom.
Oops.
Then I got trapped outside in a t-shirt and jeans in the middle of a thunderstorm. I got soaked through. And so I got home and I said, right, I'm going to avoid any more soaking disasters. I'm going to stay in and just watch something. And I watched It's a Sin in one go on Friday night.
Okay.
And
did you get counselling afterwards?
I was crying for so long that I completely flooded the bathroom all over again.
I mean, it is a phenomenal piece of work. And I mean, Russell T Davies is a genius at really sticking the knife into the viewer, and you get to care about these characters and you see them go through all sorts of awful things in this story. That's not to say there aren't humorous elements to it, but yeah, I had to watch it in segments just because it was so emotionally harrowing.
Yes, and
so to do it all in a one-er, I think, is not necessarily the best way to watch it.
Well, no, I mean, so obviously I watched Queer as Folk 20 years ago, I think that was now, and the timey jumpy thing that was quite recent. So I was quite confident that I could hack another RTD program, but I mean, this really is a quantum leap for him as a writer. It's so much more powerful and
superb,
phenomenally affecting. So I mean, maybe don't. Last question, and this again, you may or may not have an answer for this. I don't know how far your fandom extends, but do you have a favourite original Doctor Who novel?
Oh, okay. I haven't read all that many of them. I've been trying to read the New Adventures for several years, and I've currently been stuck on the Pit for about 6 months.
Oh my good lord.
But one that sort of sticks in my head that I read at the time of publication is, I think it's by Justin Richards, and it's an 8th Doctor novel called Demontage, which is a rather wonderful one about things in paintings coming to life. I think it's the second novel featuring Fitz, so it's his first story sort of out in space. There's a wonderful assassin character in it. Resonance with this, I think. And yeah, that's one I particularly remember. I think I also remember it being one of the very early ones where Paul McGann finally consented to have his face on the cover, and they just put 3 massive claw marks through it. And I just remember thinking, well, no wonder he hasn't put his face on the covers before, if that's what you're going to do. Because there's a subtle dig that you've had to do 30 novels without his face on.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I feel like we've all kind of got to know you a bit. I mean, I can't imagine there's anyone listening to this who doesn't already know you and your fine, fine work. But just in case that was the case, we've kind of introduced you. We've prodded you, we've probed you, we've found out a bit about you. And now, I suppose, it's time for a full-on massacre.
So we're coming into this off the back of the Daleks' master plan, which is... I mean, they have got similarities as much as there's an awful lot of death, but yeah, it feels like a bit of a real handbrake turn from the previous story, just to go straight into a dead straight historical. Is this one that you particularly remember enjoying watching when you did it for Flight Through Entirety?
I really did. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And it was one of a handful that I went in not knowing much about. Because around the same time we were doing the very early Flight Through Entireties, my husband and I were also doing The Great Journey of Life, start at The Unearthly Child and don't stop until, in our case, it was Death in Heaven. And... So for this, we watched the loose cannon reconstruction, which is the second one is remarkably good because, of course, the first one had about 3 photos.
Yeah, no, what they've managed to do with it is very impressive.
Yeah, you could just put that out on DVD. I know there's rights issues, and that's why they don't. But so I came to it completely fresh. I knew it was about a massacre. I knew about that last scene, but I didn't know anything else about it, and we were both gripped throughout, and it was an era of history neither of us knew much about.
Yeah, I must admit I didn't really know an awful lot about that sort of part of French history going into it. What about you, Ian?
I didn't know much about that period of history either. So I was very keen to get to grips with it, but I don't think I succeeded. I watched the first and the fourth episode with the photographic reconstructions, but episodes 2 and 3, for some reason, I watched the CGI weird kind of computer graphics. It was like playing Cyberpunk 2077 on a black and white Xbox. I mean, it was just and of course, because those characters had, let's be charitable, very little in terms of looking like the characters in the photographs in the other episodes, I very quickly realised that I had no idea what was going on or who was who or anything. So I came away from it.
A whole new spin on it.
I came away from it with rather more questions than I had going into it, and a weird, spooky coincidence.
Oh. Well, now I'm intrigued.
Yes.
Because it relates to something that happens right at the end of the story. So I wonder if we should maybe talk about.
All right, well, let's
do the French
stick a
bit
pin
of
in
the
that,
story, and then we'll come back to the.
Okay. All right. I mean, just in terms of the cast on this one, I think it's really, they knocked it out of the park. I'm assuming Paddy Russell would have been the one responsible for hiring the actors on this, because that used to be how they did it back in the olden days. So there's quite a few memorable names that crop up more than once in Doctor Who. We've got Leonard Sachs as the Admiral de Coligny. God, I've probably just completely mangled that. But he's also Barusa, isn't he? In which one is it he's in? Is it Ark of Infinity?
He's Ark of Infinity.
Yeah. We've got Andre Morel, who is, to my mind anyway, most famous for playing Quatermass. Really fantastic actor. And I think just overall, just the quality of there were quite a few names there that I didn't really recognise. Was there a guy from... Sorry, going off a slight tangent here. Was there a guy from To the Manor Born in this, or did I imagine it?
No, you're quite right. Michael Bilton, who is sort of the manservant in To the Manor Born, plays Charles de Teligny, who is... works with the King's household, I believe, in this. Yes. And he's the one who brings the news in later in the story that the Admiral has been shot, and the King goes off on a bit of a paddy, understandably.
So yeah, in terms of just the general story, I mean, it's rather like, I think J.R. Southall's describe some of the better historicals as being sort of period dramas where your favourite characters have just been kind of dropped into it, rather than being a sci-fi epic. I think this falls into that category. I don't know how much you need to know about the political shenanigans going on at the time to really enjoy it. I mean, the long and short of it is that the Catholics and the Huguenots, or Protestants as they are over here, there was just a lot of enmity for many, many years. From what I can gather, lots of wars and what have you, and they kind of broke at a peace, and it all seems to be going quite swimmingly until the king decides to marry off, I think it's his sister, isn't it, to a Huguenot prince. And that's when it all kicks off.
Yes, it's very self-explanatory, and it does give you kind of everything you need to know. But at the same time, that was too much for me. And again, I think purely because I watched it, I should have watched all 4 episodes in one format or the other, and it would probably have flowed. But it was a lot of people standing in stone buildings, having conversations with each other. And I wrote about 3 notes during part 1. I wrote, "Where are the Daleks?" I wrote, "Is Preslan Engin from Deadly Assassin?" And then I wrote, "Is that Handrid?"
Yep.
Yes, it is. Yeah, of course. I forgot to mention
when
him too.
he turned up in Invasion of Time, I I've never quite got to the bottom of where it is I think I know that actor from. He might have been a play school presenter or something when I was a kid in the, very early 80s. But I kind of recognised him when I saw him for the first time in Invasion of Time. But in that story, I thought he was about, 20, 25 as an actor.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
He'd have had to have been a teenager to be in this, and I don't think he is. So his moisturising regime is way ahead of its time.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Makes you sick, doesn't it? Not that Brendan's got anything to worry about. And we have Eric Thompson as well. I didn't even mention him, Emma Thompson's dad.
I did not know that.
You're
the Magic
kidding
Roundabout.
me.
Yeah, he plays Gaston.
Which one was Gaston?
He's the guy. If you remember watching the Recon, he's the guy dressed in black who is the. I've got to get this right. He's the one that's really pushing the Huguenot side to act preemptively before the Catholics.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the one who pulls the sword on Stephen as well.
Okay, yeah. I remember that bit. that was. Oh, this is terrible. We're normally really professional and we know what we're talking about. And purely for one story, and I'm really sorry it's happened to you, Brendan, but you've got me in full. Oh, I'll remember that bit. Oh.
No. Well,
but,
yeah, it is hard to keep track of the characters without the visual reference. Because for this one, I listened to the narrated audio.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if there were more than 3 people in a scene, I found myself sort of pausing after each scene and going, now, okay, that's the Marshal
Which
of
one was that
Tavan
again?
and Simon. Now, who's Simon again?
Simon,
kind
whose
of-
name is Peter.
Yeah. And it's just kind of remembering the relationships to one another. Also in the Tom Baker pre-reunion in this story is Nicholas Muss actor David Weston, who would later play Birrock
Good.
Oh,
in Warrior's Gate.
oh, blimey.
Is this
I mean, obviously, you're not going to recognise him because he looks like Lenny the Lion.
is this
In
the
that
most
particular
sort of
production, but-
star-studded Who story we've had so far? I feel like it is. I feel like
Wow. And you get 2 William Hartnells. I mean, that's something that's always kind of confused me in terms of what the Jeff is going on there.
what the Jeff?
I mean, at first they're kind of leading you to believe, is it the Doctor? Because the Doctor conveniently disappears in order to go off and find Dr. Preslan. And then you don't see him again for a while. And then you have the Abbot of Amboise. So is it the Doctor pretending to be the Abbot? And then it turns out it's not, because he then, spoilers, he gets bumped off. It's all, I guess it's adding to the intrigue, but it all gets a bit confusing. Or is it just me being incredibly dim?
No, I think with just the audio to go on, it is a bit confusing. And this is one that I would love to see recovered, not only because it's really good and because this particular season is so underrepresented in what we have in visual media, but just I think that the twisty-turny story gets in its own way a little bit. And having that visual absolutely helps. Like, remember when the Enemy of the World came back and we went, oh wow, this is the good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you can't tell from episode 3, which even Barry Letts said in his autobiography, one episode of this story survives, and it's the one where we made it cheaply so we could afford the helicopter.
Yeah, I feel like this is it's obviously a classic TV and film trope where you have the villain also played by the same actor as plays your heroic lead. So the audience is primed for the kind of story where either it's the Doctor impersonating the villain, or it isn't, but there's gonna be some kind of subterfuge, and the Doctor's gonna take his place, and you kind of know what you're in for, but you don't really get any kind of payoff at all, and it just feels. And again, this is my very clumsy Luddite first viewing hot take of it feels like you're coming away with really not a lot.
In the novelization, John Luca Rotti explicitly makes the Abbot, as we see him in the story, is the Doctor attempting to stop the assassination of de Coligny, but the Abbot is also a real person who then finds the Doctor out, and that's the one who ends up in the gutter. But the part of the problem...
That makes a bit more narrative sense to me.
Yeah. But part of the problem was that's how John Luca Rotti sort of saw the program. It's like, you know, the Doctor has to be involved in the plot, etc. Donald Tosh, on the other hand, kind of saw history as a tide you get swept up in. And I'm not sure if you discussed this on the show already with Dalek's Master Plan, but Tosh and Wiles had a very specific view of what Doctor Who was, and we see that for about 3 or 4 stories. And something that typifies their view of Doctor Who is that the Doctor and his friends get sort of swept along rather than necessarily being proactive. So you have two very opposing views trying to make this story work. And yeah, Ian, I see what you mean about, you know, you sort of come away going, oh, you know, there's not much involvement there. And it's funny, I'm sort of a bit known online for Black Orchid being my least favourite Doctor Who story. Because of the Doctor's lack of involvement, the Doctor's lack of judgment at the end of the story, and the fact that they don't do much with the double aspect of Nyssa.
Right.
And yet, you've got
Sounds very familiar.
Some of the same ingredients in this story, but this story is a 10 out of 10 for me.
Okay.
Well, that's very inconsistent and unfair. Poor Peter Davison, poor Terence Dudley. Oh.
No wonder I'm strapped to this table. But
yeah, we should have released you after the Mind Probe. But you look quite, good lying there.
Yeah.
In your little TARDIS hoodie. So we're gonna keep you there. Yeah.
I should point out to the gentle listener, as we record, I am of course in Australia, so it's in the morning here and it's in the winter. So I am totally in like fleecy trousers and a TARDIS dressing gown.
Well, you know what? It's the middle of summer here, and I've got the heating on. So I mean, it's very much
traditional British summer. Yeah.
I do miss the British summer. I used to wear suits every day.
Because I read on, I believe it was called Wikipedia, this kind of thing online that had lots of facts and stuff, that the novelization Luca Rotti ultimately wrote for The Massacre was based on like his second draft before Tosh had come at him to excise all that double play and make it much more of, as you say, this kind of swept along, hands-off approach kind of story. So what you've read there is obviously much closer to the original vision that Luca Rotti had for the story. And would you say that the novelization was a more satisfying experience?
The novelization gives a bit more of what you expect, and it's like puzzle pieces falling into place. Whereas the TV version, I sort of like that it's uncompromising. All the way through, Stephen, who has been involved in sort of Doctor Who, is looking at it like a Doctor Who character going, oh, okay, well, the Doctor's doing this impersonation, it's all part of a special plan. But at the end of the story, the Doctor says to him, history sometimes gives us a terrible shock. And so the program is saying, sometimes it's not a huge conspiracy or a big plan. Sometimes bad things just happen. And so,
as far as Stephen's concerned, that seems to be happening quite a lot.
Yes.
Coming off the back of the Dalek's Master Plan.
Absolutely.
And the Mythmakers as well.
Yeah. And then, Big Finish go and shove Tom Allen's character of Oliver Harper in there for a very good trilogy, but again, ends in tragedy, between those two stories. Yeah, and I think the two versions complement each other for me. I'll usually always come down on the side of the TV version, but it's like, you've got two stories which take the same idea that the Doctor really is the Abbot, and one goes, no, we're probably not going to do that. And the other goes, no, we're definitely going to do that. Because even in the TV version, the accepted fan wisdom for years is the reason the Doctor disappears from the plot is he's helping Preslan get away. But there's actually nothing in the TV version that confirms that.
No.
When the Doctor reappears, he just says, oh, I was unavoidably delayed.
Yeah, it's still very ambiguous, isn't it?
Yeah, so he absolutely could be the Abbot. And I think that was maybe Donald Tosh's concession of, I'm not going to say he wasn't. But yeah, I think I sort of like the inevitability of the TV version. It's like, no matter what you do, this is going to happen.
When you think about it, it's quite a dark subject for what is ostensibly still a children's TV show.
Well, it is, and obviously coming off the back of the absolute sacking of Troy, and then the death festival of the Daleks' master plan. This is our kind of third story in a row that, if I'm a 7-year-old watching this, I don't know if I want to watch this anymore. It's just, it's not fun.
It's not as though you get William Hartnell going, I, the Abbot of Amboise, in full Kevin Stoney mode.
Which would, I think, have elevated this to that next tier of brilliance. But we are very much in this kind of season 3 sort of dark patch. It's like when Suede released Dogman Star, they'd gone really dark, and it's something that I guess most narrative fiction goes through. Sooner or later there'll be a series or a book in that series or whatever that's just a little bit kind of meaner and nastier, and the stakes are higher, and it feels like Doctor Who's kind of, without the kind of comfortable hand of Verity Lambert, it feels like we've just lurched into this kind of Wild West free-for-all where anything can happen. And
I know, we're not onto the gunfighters yet.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, I know that's literally coming up. But we are very much in this kind of, it's not a comfortable show anymore, and people do die. And here we are having this terrible run, not terrible in a bad way, they're great stories, this really shocking run of really, really bleak Saturday evening family viewing.
Well, using your Dogman Star analogy, I found that to be an album where the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, I'm really not sure, because I really loved the first album so much. But on repeated listenings, it's become a firm favourite.
Well, it's in my top 1, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe if we revisit this at a later date, and maybe if you watch one recon or the other,
if I come down on
we might get a,
one side of it or the other.
Yeah.
So this business with the sea beggar, that's the next thing I've got written down. So who was the sea beggar?
That was the Admiral, wasn't
Admiral, right.
Yes.
And that is an historical term for when the Dutch were asking for assistance from the French in the court. They were known as the sea beggars because they had this powerful navy, yet they had to ask the French for help.
Right.
And,
because they were having issues with the Spanish, weren't they? So they were hoping for help from the French to step in, but events took a slightly...
See, it's actually really quite layered, dense and evocative, isn't it? And had it been done in a, and I've got this really sort of crass impulse to say if everyone had had a kind of appropriate accent, then it might have felt... No, because it was every single character was doing BBC received pronunciation with one notable exception to whom we will come
Yes.
later. It was very hard to kind of feel, oh, these guys are French. Oh, this is Paris. Oh, this guy's Dutch. And if you'd had this kind of gold member kind of accent, smoking a pancake, I think. And I know it's crass, and I know that's a terribly reductive way of looking at television, but I just feel as if we needed slightly more to get more out of this story.
Like, it wasn't until this time, listening to the story, that I picked up that Nicholas Muss is meant to be German.
Uh-huh.
And it is a very early line. I think the pub the pub owner says something about, the German gentleman.
Right.
And again, Nicholas Muss is a historical figure. He was the Admiral de Coligny's secretary and right-hand man, and he was German. But again, you sort of think, he's a Huguenot as well. And it's like, well, he's a Dutch Protestant rather than a French Protestant in this case. Yeah, so the accents could have helped, but then you'd have mostly everyone.
There's always
doing
that danger of it turning into hello, though, isn't there?
Yeah, that's true.
We don't. Nobody wants
absolutely right. That is the risk, and that is possibly what would have happened. But I still feel like there was more of that kind of European flavour that was lacking. Again, just because everyone would say, "Hello, good evening. I am General Mr. Frenchy. Oh, hello. I'm Herman the German." Yes. And they all clearly lived and worked in West London. So it was just, I guess, kind of a barrier for me personally.
Apart from our pseudo companion for this story, who was Anne Chaplet. So she was going for, I don't know, it's kind of West Country.
West Country mixed with France. Again, very. Yeah. It was sort of Marmoset meets hello hello in that kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Hello, I'm from down the village. Oi, 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 oi.
What did we think of Annette Robertson? Did we like her?
I really like her, and the thing is though, with the accents, you sort of listen to the rest of the cast and you listen to Annette Robinson. It's like, why is she doing that accent? Because she's a servant. And servants get West Country accents. Just ask Michael Bilton later on.
It's a disgrace.
Yeah, but that being said, I really like her. They are clearly setting her up to be the new companion before they get the sort of fear of Katerina put into them. And look, I will die on this bloody airlock, but Katerina could have worked with less lazy writing. As far as I'm concerned, like the moments where things have to be explained to Katerina, it's not this is how a door handle works. This is how a force field works, which kids in the 60s would have had to understand.
Yeah.
And, Anne is really a step in the right direction. No one ever has to explain scientific concepts to her, but she's clearly capable of deductive reasoning in that she overhears the thing about Vassy and realizes what that means
straight away,
and runs away. She's not immediately trusting. She's not stupid. She's not naive. She can track Stephen across town, kind of thing. She is a proactive character, and I really like the way Annette Robinson plays her. She is scared, quite understandably, but she doesn't lose her smarts because of that. I really like Anne Chaplet.
It's quite refreshing for a 60s female character to get quite so much agency. I know we've had Barbara in the past, but we are sometimes in danger of sort of falling into the trope of the screaming woman who needs saving constantly.
Well, I think especially
she holds her own,
especially with a character who is kind of from a period in history where there is this kind of sense of they're just there to do the cooking or the washing or the screaming, and I really like your point there, Brendan, about the lazy writing. And obviously, you've got a very simple fix that they could have employed with Katerina. They could have done with Anne, where you you take that character, and at the start of her second story, you indicate that some time has passed, and they've kind of been brought up to speed on how things work, like they did, I guess, with Jamie.
Well, Ben made a point, didn't he, last time round in our second episode on Dalek's Master Plan, and he was a big fan of Katerina, and he said that character could have worked, and she shows that she can understand things like the whole where he mentioned about how she didn't know what tablets were, but by a later point in the story she's explaining to the Doctor that she's given Stephen the tablets and that she knows what they are, and she said it with authority.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think you're certainly on the right track.
I think you've hit it firmly on the head by calling it lazy writing, because any one of the three of us could address these problems if we were script editing the show. Maybe we've got a certain amount of benefit of hindsight in our favour.
Yeah, just a tad.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've all probably had to address problems not similar to that and overcome them. And there are so many ways as a writer of taking a character and without changing or betraying that character, you can evolve them to where you need them to be. And as you pointed out, we're 95% there. They can understand tablets, they can understand anything. We still need an identification character as the TV audience at the time. So we need someone to have a gravitron accelerator explained to us. That might as well be Katerina, it might as well be Anne. And I thought she was wonderful. It was quite interesting on the computer-generated version that I watched, where she's very much this kind of minx with this kind of Susie Sue black eyeshadow and this amazing kind of ironed hair, and she just looked like, oh my god, it's a sort of sexy Egyptian princess in Paris. And then coming into part 4 and you're confronted with a photograph of the actress, you're like, that's really...
And you have to remember that your version was rendered on a PlayStation 1.
Yeah.
I mean,
this was very much not the character I'd been looking forward to seeing in the well, not the flesh, because photography. But I thought, resourceful, engaging, enjoyable, alluring, quirky, would have been really a great companion. And I sort of had this dim awareness that a new companion would be coming along, who was going to be a sort of dark-haired woman with a funny accent. So I sort of blithely assumed that Anne was going to be Dodo, because I'm very silly. Now everyone listening thinks I'm a complete fool.
Well,
they already did, didn't they? If they've heard it before, they'll be wise to my shtick by now.
Interesting factoid while we're on the subject of Annette Robertson. She, for a short time, was married to John Hurt.
Good gravy.
Oh.
Huh.
And
according to that Wikipedia that you were talking about earlier.
Wow.
That was before she told people they were the weakest link. No, that's not her. But we've all... That's the second pseudo-companion we have who's been married to a doctor, because of course Jean Marsh had been married to John Pertwee for a few years.
Indeed.
A thought just occurred to me that... spoiler alert, just jumping slightly to the end of the story, there is an implication that Dodo is related to Anne and that Anne somehow survived. It's odd then that we get Annette Robertson as Anne rather than Jackie Lane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was, again, I was expecting, if not the same character, then certainly the same actress. Because why wouldn't you?
Jackie Lane was Jenna Coleman.
Not to knock Jackie Lane, obviously.
Jackie Lane was Jenna Coleman all the time.
Now that's a very different reading of the text, and I am going to have to go back and study it really quite carefully. Mucky boy.
Now, as we record this particular episode, it comes fairly close to the news that Jackie Lane sadly passed away. And I think... I could be wrong, but I feel like she certainly got a bit of a reappraisal. I felt like there was an awful lot of love for her during the 50th anniversary, and it felt like the consensus was shifting a bit, because I do feel like she definitely got a bit of a tough time from some of the fans. Not things that were necessarily her fault either.
I mean, I'm led to believe that she's perhaps not the most fondly remembered of companions, but I mean, she's not Adric.
Wow.
So she can't have been that unpopular. I'm really looking forward to seeing her. Obviously, I've never encountered any of her stories, so she's a completely unknown companion to me. So I am looking forward to watching that. Off the back of her kind of 5 minutes at the end of part 4, I think she seems to be a very different kind of companion, while at the same time looking comfortingly like Susan, which is such a weird, creepy thing the Doctor says. He's like, well, don't you think she looks like my granddaughter? Oh dear, we've crossed a line here.
Well, she was in fact on the shortlist to play Susan.
Yes.
And the reason... I don't think she was ever offered the role, but she took herself out of consideration because she didn't want to be tied down to a year contract.
Yeah.
And indeed, the contract she was offered for this was 13 episodes, including this final episode of this story, with a possible extension for another 12. I won't say which of those options was taken up to give you some sense of apprehension here. But yeah, look, it's kind of weird. When I came to fandom in the mid-90s, there were lots of things in Doctor Who I liked that other people seemed not to. So, for instance, Time and the Rani.
Hey.
But Dodo was someone I didn't see until I was about 12 or 13, I think. And I made a friend who had a lot of sort of dubbed videotapes from the UK, and he made me copies of things. And I've always quite liked her. She's got a chirpiness that Susan and Vicky didn't always have. And I've been very glad to see that reappraisal in fandom, because for the longest time, Dodo was a punchline. And that's no more evident than her treatment in the 1990s novels such as The Man in the Velvet Mask and Who Killed Kennedy. And anyone who does listen to Flight Through Entirety knows that we do have an irreverent streak. But there is a line between irreverence and kicking.
Yeah, I mean, it comes, I feel anyway, like it comes from a place of love rather than sort of a nasty element. Yeah. And I feel what problems do arise with Dodo in the TV show are mainly due to the way she's written, certainly, rather than the way she's played. And having seen and read interviews with Jackie Lane, she's clearly a very considered person, and she spent a lot of time considering her role on Doctor Who and her eventual departure from it. And yeah, it's funny, when she did pass last week, a friend of mine who's a Doctor Who fan, but I don't think he listens to podcasts generally, we're in lockdown here in Sydney, so he's at home and he's just got a BritBox subscription and he's watching lots of classic Doctor Who, and he just sent me a text saying, "Oh, did you hear that Jackie Lane has passed away?" I said, "Yes, indeed." He's like, "I don't know what it is, but I just really like her." And he's like, I don't know if I like her more than other Hartnell companions, but there's just something. And I said, well, do you think it's that, she never came back to do an audio, she's never read an audiobook, she's never done a DVD commentary. Yeah. She's done a few conventions. She apparently quite liked appearing live and actually meeting the fans. She didn't do loads of them, but she did enough to get the sense, she quite enjoys that.
And then, of course, she did that wonderful thing on the 50th anniversary where she's like, "Oh no, I'm not coming down to the studio and finding out what Harry Styles thinks of Doctor Who."
Well, I think she obviously dodged a bullet there because that her appearance, it has to be said, was one of the few highlights of that particular show, the after show party. I made the mistake of looking it up on YouTube a few months back, and it's every bit as cringeworthy as I remember. I mean, just the joy of seeing Stephen Moffat with his head in his hands, just thinking, "Oh God, what am I doing here?" And it's painful.
Oh, this sounds remarkable.
And when they start referring to the actors as their characters' names as well, you just think, come on, please.
So I've never seen this because when the 50th was happening, I was living in the Middle East, so it was all I could do to watch the Day of the Doctor very, very slowly as it buffered every 30 seconds. But I'm kind of conflicted. Part of me wants to cavort, gamble, skip and jump merrily towards YouTube right now with a big bag of popcorn, and part of me thinks, no, don't watch that. That would be sad.
I think it probably inhabits the same territory as the Star Wars Holiday Special. It has that kind of it's so bad you can't help but watch it. Make of that what you will.
I will probably watch that then. So just to maybe dart back into the story, because I feel like we should wrap up talking about the French bit. And there isn't really too much to say. You know, you've got these various strands of plotting and treachery going on. You've got the Doctor, as we've said, kind of unexplainedly absent, so that William Hartnell can have, you know, a week at Camber Sands smoking roll-ups or whatever it is he does on his downtime. And then you get that kind of stunning, awful final montage of, at least, so on the recon I watched, there were these line drawings of impalation, hanging, immolation, flogging, murder, and beheading, as to horrific. Depict the massacre. I don't know how that would have been depicted in the show. No. I don't, you know, we'll probably never know, sadly, unless Indiana Morris is going to surprise everyone by having found another story, which seems unlikely. So yeah, that again, that was a real kind of gut punch for me.
Those images you see, according to production documentation, were the images used, and it was done in a similar way.
Wow!
Really?
What we lose in the recon, quite understandably, is that those images were mixed with characters such as the Admiral de Coligny and Nicholas and Gaston being killed on screen.
Oh, because we just see their faces kind of superimposed over the line drawings on the recon. So the recon has kind of attempted to follow Paddy Russell's vision
direction as close as possible. Now the actual killing of the Admiral de Coligny was quite brutal.
I've been reading about it. He was disemboweled, thrown naked out the second story window, and then beheaded in the street.
I mean, we've all had some bad times at Freshers Week, but that does sound... Right. Holy hell. So I'm guessing they sort of probably pulled back from that to a certain extent when they were dramatising it.
Yeah, it was probably man steps in front of him with sword, back
pokey,
goes in front of camera.
Yeah,
scream, fade to black. But I find those images very effective because it happens as the Doctor and Stephen leave. And, you know, using images like that was probably a practical consideration of we can't afford the extras, and obviously we can't show many people being stabbed on screen. But as a viewer, I kind of get the impression of we've been living in it for the last 3 episodes. Now it's history. And this is how we look at history. And we might go to a museum and look at that image and go, oh, isn't that sad? But Paddy Russell saying to it, no, look at it and hear the screams.
Yeah.
You know, this is something terrible that happened. And for me, that's why that sequence is so effective. And it goes on for, I think, a good minute. You know, it's not just 10 seconds. And it's not just they leave in the TARDIS and then we cut to inside the TARDIS with Stephen remonstrating with the Doctor. It's like, no, we're going to sit with this. Yeah, I think maybe...
I guess they have to try and convey some of the sheer horrificness of it, because it spread, didn't it, from Paris out across France.
Yes, that's right.
I think it lasted for about 3 days in Paris, and then the estimates are just mind-boggling of how many people died, anywhere from sort of 3,000 to 10,000, and then they're talking about 20,000 nationally, and it's just horrendous.
I mean, televisually, it makes me think of the end of Blackadder Goes Forth, where again you had a slightly longer than may have been necessary kind of slow motion montage of everyone sort of charging heroically towards their inevitable death. But obviously you didn't see anyone die in Blackadder. But when I was, I don't know, 10 or 12, whenever that was on TV, that again was really, really powerful stuff. And I wonder if this... Obviously, you've only known these characters for, 3.5 weeks previously. But just the protracted, slow, measured, unrelenting depiction of the horrors must have been so powerful, so affecting. And I return to my earlier theme of what has Doctor Who become at this point? It's just death, 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 death.
Yeah. I talk a fair bit on Flight Through Entirety about what I sort of go, yeah, this is good television, but is it good Doctor Who? And I think things that aren't necessarily good Doctor Who but are good television can be done occasionally in the series. And I do put the Caves of Androzani in that category.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I always say Caves of Androzani is the best Blake Seven story ever made. And this is another one of those examples of, you know what, we couldn't do this every month, but at this stage, we're kind of doing this every month.
Unfortunately, going back to your previous example, no one told Eric Saywood to stop doing it every month. But, there we go. That's for later.
But yeah, and then kind of Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis come along and give us something very different.
Yeah.
But that being said, even though we've just had kind of 4 months of death and Daleks and Trojans and death and spam, bacon, eggs, and death.
What about death? You missed out death.
Well, I think that's the episode title sorted.
I don't like death. Well, you can have my death. Anyway, but yeah, I think just the realism of this and its refusal to say that this is a sci-fi thing and this is a big plot. It's like, no, this is pure unvarnished history, and we're going to give this to you. And I suppose it pays respect to what happened. It's a bit like the Whittaker era had to be very careful when they were doing Rosa not to downplay the seriousness of the historical event. And I think that's a story that succeeds in that regard, and similarly has the Doctor say, no, we just have to be swept along with history in this. And the Doctor does this here as well, and it brings up an interesting point as to whether not changing history is a moral law or a physical law. And John Lucarotti has sort of given us both in his tenure back in the Aztecs. The Doctor's imploring Barbara not to change history. It's implied to be a physical law. Even though she tried, she couldn't change anything except she helped one person. And here, it's implied that the Doctor has helped Anne, and that Stephen has helped Anne, of course. But the implication from the Doctor at the end of the story is that not changing history is a moral law. He says to Stephen very sadly, I can't change the course of history, but it's more in the way of, I might want to, and it's given us a terrible shock, but it's not something I'm allowed to do, rather than
I shouldn't.
We absolutely can't do this.
So that's fascinating because obviously John Lucarotti wrote both stories you've just mentioned that have these two different interpretations of the limitations of meddling with the timelines. But do we think John Lucarotti wrote that bit of the Massacre, or was that a little bit of tosh that snuck in towards the end?
Well, if you'd asked Donald Tosh, he probably would have said yes. He's rather fond of taking credit for, well, anything really.
Bless him.
I hear he got the third penalty last night.
Oh, don't. Too soon. Not by the time this goes out, but yeah too soon.
You know, I think you may be onto something there because, again, in Lucarotti's novelisation, and, you know, Lucarotti's novelisation is written with the benefit of 20 years of hindsight and bitterness. But in that novelisation, the Doctor does explicitly help the Chaplets get away from Paris.
Okay.
Which, you know, undoubtedly is changing history, or is it, you know?
Yeah.
And, of course, he tries to stop the assassination of de Coligny, which would be changing history. So it's hard to say exactly whose vision that is. If we do say it's Tosh's vision, it shows the difference between, say, David Whittaker and Donald Tosh, because David Whittaker is the person who came up with the idea that if you do change something in history, history will do something else to change it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's sort of a what-if scenario. It's a sliding doors thing of what would John Lucarotti's The Massacre have looked like on TV.
Yeah. It's something, you know, it's a big question mark at the heart of Doctor Who, whether you can change time but shouldn't, or whether you simply can't. And I think it really needs some kind of, I don't know, late period David Tennant story involving, I don't know, a fixed point, just to pluck something at random out of the ether to really make sense of that and help us all understand what's been going on all this time. Or not.
That's a useful phrase. Fixed point, you say?
Fixed point, yes. Because, you know, I have my own personal theory of Doctor Who that every single time the TARDIS lands, that is reality, but no other story's chronology or timeline has any bearing anymore because every story exists in isolation, which is why you can have so many different kinds of future, kinds of technology, kinds of politics, you know, whatever. And so changing time is a very different thing. And I think the problem we're uncovering already, and we're into year 3 and a bit of the show that's been going for 60 years, is that every writer comes to it with a slightly different approach to the underlying quantum mechanics of what they're trying to do. So you get things, and you know, generally it doesn't matter and it shouldn't matter. And if anyone seriously loses sleep over inconsistencies like how does changing time work, then they need to probably get out more, take up a hobby, get some fresh air, meet some friends, you know, just find other things to worry about, things that are, dare I say, more important than a kid's TV show. But at the same time, you do kind of start to see all these different contrasting and competing creative inputs tugging the show this way and that way, and it's having a really hard time settling down into a sensible alien-infused base under siege show that it will eventually reach and become in about 2 years' time. But at the moment, it's still way up in the air because everyone's coming at it with very different understandings of how things work and what can be done with the format. Sorry, that was a very long sentence there. Sorry.
Yeah, I think what it does, it throws up that variety that we've really enjoyed over the past couple of seasons, and you never really quite know what you're going to get from story to story. So, you know, there's swings and roundabouts when it comes to that side of it.
On that thing of, you know, having so many writers involved and production teams, I think that's something the new series loses slightly. And there's a wonderful Twitter account called the Herald of Creation who has been doing these daily polls.
Will they ever end?
Will they ever end? And Probably by the time this comes out, they'll have finally ended. But at the moment, he's pitting like everything he can against Ascension of the Cybermen because he doesn't have a good place for it on his list. And I almost understand his logic, but I don't quite grasp it. But I think he's doing an amazing job and a wonderful service for fandom.
Yeah, I take part.
Yeah,
on a regular basis.
Me too, every day. But he's talked about in these polls there seems to be a classic series bias. More often than not. And look, I have to agree with that because, like both of you, I've watched a fair bit of the classic... Well, I've watched all of the classic series, actually, come to think of it. But because it's the one I grew up with, I'm kind of more fond of it. And I have sort of interrogated that. It's like, well, is the new series better? And it's like, in many ways, empirically, it is better. But I think one of the strengths the classic series has is you do have all those different voices.
Yeah.
Whereas the new series, Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat, Chris Chibnall rewrite everything to some extent. And it does mean you get a greater level of consistency, but it also means you lose that variety.
Yeah.
And that even means you kind of lose the different tone of things like Time Lash or the Twin Dilemma or the Sensorites. And you kind of go, oh, okay, but, that means we get a higher level of overall quality. It's like, yes, but it's a little bit less textured and possibly a little bit less interesting. And I think that's why the classic series will always win out for me. Because there's nothing else in the show quite like the Massacre.
Yeah.
And I think even with its shortcomings and it's kind of being a bit hard to follow who people are, that's why it's so high up on my list, because it's so unique and so uncompromising, which is funny when you consider how compromised the script was.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I suppose then we should maybe skip on to the sort of closing, I guess, 10-minute coda where Stephen says he's leaving. The TARDIS lands.
He's had enough.
Stephen leaves. The Doctor
with his hair
takes his hair with him, flounces out with the hair structure intact, and then the Doctor is on his own for about 90 seconds, in which time he completely psychologically collapses. He's lonely. He can't possibly cope anymore. The doors are still open. He could call Stephen back. He's been on his own for 17 seconds, and he's thinking, oh, maybe I'll just go home. Oh, it's all terrible. And then, quite conveniently, Dodo comes charging into the TARDIS, and we've got our new companion. It's a bit, I don't know, clumsy, rushed, shoehorned. What do we think?
She doesn't seem particularly surprised to find that the TARDIS is massive inside compared to the exterior, which I suppose is a refreshing change from the usual, oh my god, it's bigger on the inside. I think, going back to what Brendan was saying, I think she's quite a sort of plucky and likeable character for all that you get to really, as much as you can get to know someone over like a 2-minute segment of a story. But yeah, it's perhaps a bit shoehorned, putting it mildly.
I think with Dodo, there's a twinkle in her eyes, and you get the sense that in between takes, the actress is around the back of the studio having cigarettes, and and she's not going to be, and I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, but quite so po-faced and earnest as some of the other companions. She manages to convey in 2 lines of dialogue and 1 kind of glance. Yeah. She manages to convey that there's a bit of an edge to her, bit of something different, and I think that is
a bit of spunk, as I think they say in Australia.
I was trying to avoid the spunk, which isn't always easy to do.
That's what you always say, Ian.
Sorry, I'll clean up a bit.
When I thought it was only mine, I wasn't quite so worried. You might want to cut that bit, I don't know.
Oh no, that's staying in.
It's going
I
in the
have
end.
been tied down for a very long time.
I know, but you've got your hands in manacles.
You've been very
How
patient.
Have you done that? But who wants to hear about my spooky moment?
Oh yes, please.
So there's, and again in the recon, possibly it was very different on TV, but I doubt it. You get the shot of the TARDIS on what we now know to be Wimbledon Common, and you see Dodo running towards it, and I just had this kind of like feeling like someone walking on my grave, kind of shivery. Ooh, what if Iain and Barbara popped up? And I don't know where that thought came from or why it occurred to me, and of course it didn't happen. But 10 minutes after the episode, when I was researching the story on Wikipedia, Iain and Barbara were due to record a little cameo at that moment.
No.
Now, either that's something I would have read in a Peter Haining book in the 80s and forgot all about.
It's just kind of lodged in your brain
which
somewhere.
I can't believe that's true. But otherwise, how could I possibly have made that association or got that kind of foreshadowing of something that...
Oh, how lovely would that have been?
Yeah, I gather the reason it didn't happen was one of them was doing a play. I can't remember which, but I gather that's the reason it didn't happen. But yeah, it was in the script.
Oh wow!
You know, if we can get them, I think I think they did just plump for 2 extras walking by and reacting to the TARDIS disappearing. But yeah, it was in the script and written as they would just ad lib some dialogue.
Yeah.
So I say it was in the script, but it was just, you know, Iain and Barbara are there. React.
Iain does something leaden in a suit and tie, and Barbara immediately starts rending her cardigan in two as the TARDIS. I imagine it would have gone very much like that. Was it? I'm assuming that didn't make it into the novelisation, Brendan.
No, it didn't. The novelisation doesn't actually feature that scene at all. Stephen never storms out. He does remonstrate with the Doctor slightly, but sees his point of view more easily. The novel actually has a framing device of the Doctor being called up in front of the Time Lords to justify his actions, which at the time JNT was actually against. He sort of said, no, the Time Lords weren't established at this point in the show.
Who are these Time Lords you speak of?
Yeah, exactly. But then Luca Rotti explained, it's like, well, this is to sort of get around the discrepancies and because I'm doing this so differently from the TV version, this is to explain, the Doctor to explain what happened and whether he was duplicate or not. And that's when JNT agreed. But in the epilogue, the Doctor talks about how that led to him meeting Dodo.
Okay.
He doesn't go into a great deal of detail, but basically he justifies what he did by saying this family did survive. So yeah, Luca Rotti is absolutely prefiguring the fires of Pompeii there.
Wow.
Yeah. But
how crazy.
Yeah, I wonder if you didn't read it somewhere, Iain, if you were just thinking along the same lines as Donald Tosh and going, oh wow, wouldn't this be a lovely thing? It's like Stephen Moffat talks about writing Twice Upon a Time, and he didn't intend to have Pearl Mackie in the script when he was writing it, but he got up to the scene where Bill appears, and he writes, you know, the door opens and he just sort of sat back and he's like, who is the person I want to see come through that door? And just something in his brain went, Pearl Mackie. And so he wrote it and then called her agent and said, is she free on these dates?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, it's certainly not out of the question that you have just thought along parallel lines, especially seeing as, you know, we've been talking about what we would have done as the script editor with Katerina and Anne.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that gave me quite the Wiggins for a good 5 minutes. I was ooh. But you know, enough about my psychological problems.
Well, unless we got anything else to say about this story, shall we rate it?
I've got one thing that I realise we haven't said, and that is to praise Joan Young, who plays Catherine de Medici in episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Because
the Queen Mother.
Yeah, arguably she's the main villain of the story.
Yeah.
Because she's the one who comes to Marshal Tavin and says, okay, how about, and hear me out here, instead of a targeted list of a few Huguenots we want to kill, just to save time, all of them? Just spitballing here.
Yeah.
And she's just...
It's a lot easier if you just kill them all.
Yeah. She's got such chilling menace, but out of a motivation of what she sees as protecting her family line and protecting the soul of France, as it were. You know, she is a religious fanatic just played with such subtlety, and I really like her.
Because, of course, she's terrified that now that you've got a Huguenot married into the family, that they'll end up worming their way in and doing something unspeakable to become the king. But, she's great in this. I think what you were saying there about her being sort of evil character, I just had this image from what you were talking about, because flashing back to Time and the Rani, I could just imagine her saying, "Leave the Catholics. It's the Huguenots I want." Do you think that would work? Not really.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure she'd carry off those red leather boots in quite the same way as Kate O'Mara, but...
Oh, no, she would have been fabulous in them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You've been known to do a bit of crossplay in your time, young Brendan.
I have. And
thought about doing Catherine and Medici, or...?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I'd look good in a bonnet.
Well, I mean, I'm still remembering your Zoe from from The Mind Robber. It's still etched on my brain.
Yeah, I tell you what, I had that catsuit custom made, and it's gotten quite a few uses. I have been at a dance party on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean wearing that, and it got quite a few compliments. So yeah, it was a good investment.
Yeah, not many people can pull that off, Brendan.
No. People tried. It was that kind of dance party.
And on that note, I think we really should score this story. And I am going to come to Brendan first. What would you give this out of 10?
I give this one a 10 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
It's one of my top Hartnells.
Okay. Straight in there.
Straight in.
Iain, I feel like we're going to see two very different opinions, potentially.
You do you? Do you want me to go now?
Go on, then.
Do you want it, sir? Do you want it now? So, as I've said a number of times, it's a missing story. You can either watch one kind of recon or you can watch the other. Don't do what I did and try and cobble it all together, because it makes no sense. It was very hard to follow. It's very wordy. It was a lot of people mumbling in cold stone corridors. But for all that, it was historically, obviously incredibly accurate. Well, not incredibly accurate, but accurate to a point.
It treated the subject with a degree
of respect. You had a very confident bit of writing. I was going to say screenplay, but that is pretentious. And everyone was obviously playing it totally straight, giving it a lot of respect. I think I'm going to give this an 8 purely because I know it's a better story than my first experience gave me. So I'm confident that it is a belter, but I'm just a bit thick and didn't quite appreciate on my first viewing.
Well, on that note of being a bit thick, I am going to say it's not one that I was necessarily looking forward to that much. My first experience of it was probably the recon, the loose cannon recon, because I went through a phase of just being obsessed with the missing episodes. And maybe I just wasn't in the right frame of mind for it, or a bit too dim to really understand what was going on. But it didn't really leave that much of an impression on me. Maybe because I'd just gone through Dalek's master plan, which I absolutely adore.
You kept that quiet.
Still, I know I've not mentioned it once. So I think this rewatch has certainly upped it in my estimation. I am gonna give it a 7. So I think overall it's come out relatively well. We'll probably get a lot of hate mail from Hartnell fanatics who say we should all give it a 10, but I think we all enjoyed it.
I think we did.
Yes.
Anywho, enough of that. Let's get some listener feedback.
I've got mail.
As is customary, our first bit of feedback is some audio feedback from our dear friend Ben Schneider down in Indiana.
You know, guys, it is popular in Doctor Who fan circles to say that the worst episode cliffhanger of all time is Death to the Daleks Part 3, where they casually walk up to a checkered floor pattern. Stop! Do not move! And, But for my money, the most boring episode cliffhanger ever has got to be Massacre Episode 2. Some old guy looks all thoughtful up to the air, and he says almost in a whisper that he will be known as the Sea Beggar. Okay. Wow. The Sea Beggar, huh? Can't wait to tune in next week for that. I miss Mavic Chin. Also Magic Chin.
Thank you, Ben. And I have got some Twitter feedback from a listener of ours called Morning Time, and his Twitter handle is @MorningTime2020. And they say, when you set something in France, you could end up with some offensive accents, but luckily here the only accent that jars arrives in the last few minutes. Harsh. I bought the Target novel when I was 11 or 12 and loved it even without any alien involvement. Bought the audio and same. The only thing that would improve the story is if the wonderful Iain Chesterton was still travelling with the Doctor.
Am I being trolled? Am I being trolled?
I don't know what you mean.
What the F?
Iain. Iain was great. Everyone loves Iain. Top bloke, frankly. Thank you, Morning Time 2020. Iain.
I would like to announce my resignation from this podcast in response to that. I didn't get on with Iain Chesterton, I'll be honest.
You never mentioned it.
No. I found him a little bit pompous and insufferable, don't you know?
No.
He stimulated my phagocytes.
Well.
Anyway, in terms of...
Dirty.
He was ever such a naughty. So I have heard from our very dear friend, Dave from the Doctor Who show, Mr. David Kitchen. Hello, Dave.
Hello,
Hope
David.
you're well.
Hello, Dave.
He says, whilst this could be dismissed as just a lot of talking in rooms, it is very good talking in rooms. Hartnell, as both the Abbot and in his final speech as the Doctor, not his final speech ever as the Doctor, I hasten to add, just his final speech in this story as the Doctor.
Thanks for clarifying there.
Point of business there. Shows how strong he was as an actor, and surely ends any debate that he was feeble and sick at this time. And thank you, David. That does brilliantly remind me of something that we didn't really talk about, which is that when Hartnell was portraying the Abbot, as has been commented on before, there were no billy fluffs, there was no air of, I can't remember what I'm doing. He absolutely nailed it, which is another little fascinating thing you can take away from the story, was his portrayal of the Doctor and its attendant fluffs. Was that deliberate or not? We've got room to think. Now, I'm going to forget who this one's from, so I've got to go back a screen. It's from Ross from Gallifrey's Most Wanted. He says, "This is my favourite missing story.
Oh.
I love the duelling storylines of Stephen and the Doctor. I want to see Hartnell as the Abbot of Ambrose. I do love the historical." Pretty strong stuff there. But you've got to admire someone who knows their own mind and knows their own love of the show. So thanks for that.
Why? I'm sure he would have given it a 10 out of 10 as well. Before we go to Brendan, we've got another bit of audio feedback, this time from another friend of the show, Mr. Andy Moore. So let's hear what he's got to say.
Settle down, settle down. So good of you to join us, Mr. Cockworm. Quick as you can, please. Today's topic is the massacre
of St. Bartholomew's Eve.
For those of you who haven't done the reading, and yes, I am indeed looking at you, Mr. Martin, the massacre
of St. Bartholomew's Eve
is a gripping historical tale laced with a growing sense of impending doom. But perhaps the most interesting thing about the massacre
of St. Bartholomew's Eve
are the two questions it perennially throws up. Firstly, is this really suitable subject material for a Doctor Who adventure? And secondly, this story, perhaps more than any other, causes us to ponder the second biggest what-if casting question in Doctor Who history. Namely, what if it were John Noakes and Shep who had been cast as space pilot Stephen Taylor, rather than Pieter Perves? Of course, I'm sure I don't need to remind you that the first biggest is, of course, what if the Doctor had been played by Michael Bentine's Potty Time? Just pause for a second, if you will, and consider the implications this decision could have had on the story, the massacre
of St. Bartholomew's Eve,
and how the phrase, "Now then, Bradley Massacre," never appears in the story Fish Legend Live. Cast that time.
And thank you, Andy. Most creative. Let's head over to Brendan.
So my feedback comes from Philip Edney, of course, one of the hosts of the Sirens of Audio, the Big Finish-focused podcast by Philip and Dwayne. And
G'day.
He says, the massacre proves how good an actor William Hartnell was, and that so much of his ums and ahs that people think is him forgetting his lines is actually put on for the character. Philip, Iain, I've got him on Skype on the screen here. He is throwing his hands up in the air in triumph. Back to Philip. He is word perfect as the Abbot of Amboise and so chilling. Peter Purves also shines as Stephen. Peter Purves is more regularly the lead of the show than any other companion before or since. A real tragedy that we have nothing of this story aside from a few stills. Look, I can't argue with any of that. Hartnell as the Abbot of Amboise, Hartnell had wanted to play another part in the show for some time. He had suggested a story called The Son of Doctor Who, where he would play the Doctor's evil son without the wig, etc. And Donald Tosh and John Weil said, no, that's a bit silly, but did keep in mind that he wanted to play another part, and that's where the Abbot of Amboise came from. Paddy Russell, the director, recalls that she was warned that Hartnell was difficult, but what she actually found was that he was deeply passionate about the role and wanted to get it right. So during rehearsal, she was actually very strict with him on the Abbot and would stop him and say, no, that's a Doctor thing. That's a Doctor thing you're doing. You should do this instead. And apparently Hartnell was incredibly receptive to that, because as much as he wanted to get the Doctor right, he wanted to prove he could do other things. I think at this point he was afraid of being typecast, and he's like, well, I can't go off and do something else because this is taking up all my time. I'll do something else within the show. As for the point about Peter Purves, absolutely, as Hartnell's health was allegedly ailing, Peter was given a share of the show to do, and according to Peter Purves himself, Hartnell may not necessarily been glad of that, but was grateful to Peter for carrying part of the show as well. And to Peter's credit, the way he talks about it seems to be he never sort of let that go to his head. He didn't think he was the star of the show. William Hartnell was the star of the show, and he was helping him in whatever fashion, and if that meant taking on more of a leading role, that was also good for him as an actor. Finally, with Peter getting so much to do in this story, that was an active decision by Donald Tosh to make up for Galaxy 4.
Oh, I see.
Now, I really like Galaxy 4, but of course Peter Purves has said for ages he's not too fond of it, because why does an astronaut get trapped in an airlock? is his whole rationale there. He's like, I'm meant to be this intelligence, sort of scientifically driven character from the future. And so Donald Tosh gives him a role where it not only highlights Stephen's intelligence, but Stephen's loyalty to the Doctor, because all the way through, he's saying, no, the Doctor's got a plan, I agree with Philip there. It is a tragedy that we don't even have telesnaps of this, because John Wiles just wasn't that keen on getting telesnaps. That's why we don't have them. He was saving money, and he's like, nah, don't need to buy these. We're not going to need them. And look, you can't blame him for that any more than you can blame the BBC for junking the tapes. It was something... Television was seen as ephemeral.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame that this one was seen as ephemeral.
Absolutely.
But we are very fortunate. We have the soundtrack, so...
One thing that really leapt out at me, this is fast becoming my favourite thing with Stephen Taylor, is that at random points in any given story, he'll just shout out one word in his usual, really... He's getting increasingly cross with each story. And there's my favourite bit in Dalek's Master Plan is where he just bellows the word directional for no real reason. And in this one, right at the end, when he hears Dodo's last name, he just kind of screws his face up and goes, Chaplet! And it's lovely. I just love his little staccato bursts of rage. Oh, wonderful.
So is he growing on you, Ian? Because I did get the impression you felt he was going to be as annoying as
he's
Mr. Chatterton.
He's annoying, but in different ways. And he is actually quite annoying, isn't he?
Sorry, Peter, if you're listening.
I love you, Peter. I think you're wonderful.
I liked you in Blue Peter.
Oh, yes.
All that hair.
Yeah.
Cascading. I'm an authority, you know.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your feedback. It's really great to hear from you guys. And if you want to get in touch, you can hear all the various ways over our end credits. So it just leaves us to thank the wonderful Brendan Jones for coming on and being such a great guest. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ian, for having me. And thank you, dear listener.
Before you go, would you like to give a little plug to what you've got going on?
Yes. So, thank you. Over on Flight Through Entirety, we have just wrapped up Matt Smith's first series, so Series 5. So we have about 213 episodes covering An Unearthly Child right through to A Christmas Carol. We will be back later this year with Series 6. Related to that, we have our James Bond podcast, Bondfinger, which obviously with No Time to Die being constantly delayed, we have had no James Bond to discuss for quite some time. So we've been doing related programs such as The Avengers, The Prisoner, The Champions.
I love The Avengers.
Yes, so you can find that at bondfinger.com, flightthroughentirety.com for the first one. We have a flashcast for the current era called Jodie into Terror, continuing our tradition of naming our Doctor Who podcasts after episodes of The Chase.
Let's not forget Brandy Bongos.
Brandy Bongos over on YouTube, my intermittently updated YouTube channel. And the reason that hasn't been updated is because I've been helping my parents move house for several months. But that should be returning soon at time of recording, so by the time this comes out, there should be some new stuff up there. And I do things like Doctor Who in 10 seconds and Say Something Nice, where I say nice things about every individual episode of Doctor Who. It's going to be a little while before I'm up to the Massacre as it happens, because the ratings for Ep 1 were 8 million, sinking to around 6 million for the other episodes. This was only the third time Doctor Who had dropped out of the top 100. Again, I think, like Ian, people were asking, where are the Daleks? And finally, I'm on terms of social media, I'm most active on Twitter, where you can find me at Brandy Bongos.
How marvellous. Thank you so much for coming on and being such a great guest. And we'll be back next time for a trip to the Ark. I think it's the Ark. Please tell me it's the Ark.
It's the Ark.
Is it the Ark? It's
Yes.
the Ark, yeah. So until next time, I was Mark.
I was Ian.
And I was Brendan Chaplet.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback, or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music. So until next time, I was Mark.
I was Ian.
And I was Brendan Chaplet.
You need to do a Dodo crossplay now. But is it going to be the orange and black ensemble or the black and white quarters? No.
Yep, yeah. Celestial Toymaker in football shorts with red circles on. I've already thought that one out.
Good Lord.
Wow.
You better be careful or we'll all be able to see the Bell of Doom.
Wow, there's an image.
I do beg your pardon. I couldn't resist that one.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah, that's brilliant.
That might have to go in as an Easter egg at the end.